So in the Manjushri prayer, where it talks about sentient beings being overwhelmed by ignorance and caught in the iron net of our karma, it's very helpful to think of specific people in this state. Because when we do, it helps us generate compassion for them. And it makes it easier then to see that all sentient beings are completely befuddled by their ignorance. And that includes us. So it's not like we're a spectator to everybody else's ignorance and samsara. We are in this boat too. This is talking about our situation as well. And in this way, it helps us generate renunciation of samsara, the wish to be free from it. And it also helps us generate bodhicitta, because we see that we and sentient beings are exactly the same in being so befuddled, so unclear, so unable to see reality. And not only are we obscured in that way, but also we grasp things as existing in the opposite way from how they actually exist. And we think that what we're perceiving is true. We believe all of our opinions are accurate. And so just being able to see that we suffer from ignorance and the attachment and jealousy, arrogance, anger, and so forth that arise from it, just even seeing that is difficult. Yeah, we might see it in other people. That's always easy, isn't it? But to really question how we see things, how we think about things, that is a whole other thing that our self-centered mind does not want to do. But if we're going to get anywhere on the path and benefit both ourselves and others, we have to start questioning these things in ourselves and making some changes. And also, when we see others obscured by their ignorance, instead of hating them, to have compassion. Just as we want others to have compassion for us when we're completely obscured by our ignorance and the three poisons. So think about this for a moment. Use it to generate the bodhicitta motivation for sharing the Dharma today. So Venerable Kunga, you had questions from yesterday. Would you like to say them into the microphone? One at a time, okay?
Exactly, or paraphrase? Paraphrase is okay, or?
Yeah.
So the first question was about the Chittamatra assertion that the subject and the object arise from the same latency in the mind stream. And I'm wondering if the Chittamatrans believe that the object can be form, made of form, something material, or does it have to be non-material because it comes from the mind?
Okay, so as we know, the very clear definition of form is that which is suitable to be called form, which tells you a lot. Okay, we usually, when we say form, what is our idea? Something out there that we can touch and see and hear, and well, it may not, we could taste it, but it may not taste so good, but it's something out there that we can tell with our senses that's completely separate from our mind, okay? And so when we say, it arises, the form arises from the same latency on the mind as the consciousness perceiving it, we still think of form as out there, objective, apart from the mind. It's so difficult for us to think of it as any other way, But if you think about it, if it arises, if its substantial cause is the latency on the mind, then maybe what we see as out there solid form is actually appearance, okay? Because we say, it's form, I can touch it, it's hard, okay? Push on that hard and think of just the sensation of hardness and think that is an appearance to my mind. Okay, this is getting us into Madhyamaka a bit too. It's not hardness. There's not a table out there that has the characteristic of hardness. I am designating table based on the characteristic of hardness, based on the characteristic of the color and the shape and all those things. Okay? So we're trying to see things in a different light. Yeah, they're not solid out there, but they are things appearing to our mind. Yeah. And we can talk about them and communicate with others. Yeah. But they're things, related to the mind. Okay? And so that line in the, which sutra is it? It's in the Yogacarya Bhumi that all things are created by the mind. Yeah? And so this is very much the Chittamatra view. Yeah. What's interesting when we get to Madhyamaka is, in one way, Chittamatra is, it seems to me, you go Vaibhasika, Satantrika, Chittamatra, and then back to Madhyamaka. Somehow Chittamatra, where did they go, huh? Where did they get those ideas? But then, when you get to Madhyamika, you see, there's certain influences of Chittamatra. And one is this idea that, things do not exist independent of the mind. Of course, Madhyamaka says they exist by being merely designated. But this same idea of, they're not out there saying, I'm a table from my own side. I have naturally the name table. You couldn't call me anything else. That we're getting that kind of questioning in Madhyamaka from the Chittamatra system. And also the whole idea in Madhyamaka, we talk a lot about latencies, karmic seeds, karmic imprints, all these things. So all the schools talk about them, but they become especially important in Chittamatra. And that helps you also in, thinking about Madhyamaka, that, what I'm seeing, again, isn't out there independent of my mind, but what I'm seeing, how I'm seeing it, has to do with the latencies that I've put on my mind. And this is why other people and other types of living beings see things completely different, yeah? And why when we talk about conventions, it's, there's different conventions according to each culture, according to each type of sentient being, yeah? And so it really, broadens our mind to think of how much of a role we play in our experience. Yeah? And then your second question?
So there's a footnote on page 27, number 3. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me to be saying that the Yogacara school is one subdivision of the mind-only school. They're not synonymous.
Yeah, I remember reading that too, and also what you wrote in the question, that one in the Legacy series, somebody
George Dreyfus. I looked it up.
Mentioned something as if Yogacarya could be something different. So I tried to research that as much as I could, without much success in finding some explicit, explanation of it. The only thing I could come up with is when we get to Madhyamaka, of course we have the division into Svatantrika and Prasangika. In the Svatantrikas, there's two subdivisions. One is the Sautantrika, Svatantrika. The other one is the Yogacarya Svatantrika. So I was thinking it might be in that way, because how they assert things being the product of the latent and the object and the subject as the product of the same latency on the mind. They describe that in terms of conventional existence, and then they negate true existence when it comes to ultimate existence. So maybe that's what it is, because it is Yogacarya Chittamatra, but it's used in a different way, in a Madhyamaka sense. In China, I think they use predominantly the term Yogacara. Yeah, isn't it? It's the way I've, none of our Chinese friends.
They use mind only.
Huh? They use mind only, but they wouldn't say Chittamatra. Yeah, they usually say Yogacara. Anyway, so I early on in the Library of Wisdom and Compassion, I used Chittamatra, but then the more I thought about it, I thought I want to be inclusive, so I changed it to Yogacara. I don't think that's wrong. Yeah. Okay. So we left off where? Interpreting, we did two types of selflessness. Okay. What?
Four appearances and four latencies.
Yes, we did that. Okay, we were on definitive versus provisional interpretations, weren't we? Yeah. Okay. So that's on page 28 of the booklet, page 34 of the PDF. Okay, so first of all, in terms of vocabulary, some people use definitive and interpretable. Some people use definitive and provisional. Yeah, so provisional and interpretable here have the same meaning. The idea being that the Buddha said something that required interpretation as a provisional explanation to people who weren't ready yet to hear the definitive explanation. Okay, so don't think, oh, there's definitive, then there's interpretable, then there's a third one, provisional. No, provisional and interpretable, just two different translations. Okay, so in a previous chapter, we observed that one of the principal features of the Buddhist teachings is that they were spoken to accord with the varying spiritual and mental needs and dispositions of his audience. Okay, this is so true. And the more you study, the more you see it. And so many sutras will actually say this, that this is what the Buddha is doing. And you can see that that's what makes the Buddha such a skillful teacher, okay? He doesn't say, look, it's like this, and everybody has to see it exactly like this, because this is the one and only pure view that everybody needs to accept. And if you don't accept it, it's because you're stupid, it's because you're going to go to hell, and so you better, do something quick. And even you don't believe it, say you believe it, okay? So the Buddha doesn't do that. And so this goes back, and His Holiness talks a lot about this, how when we say what is the right teaching or the perfect teaching, that's a very personal thing, okay? Because if you, for example, made everybody adopt the Madhyamaka view, and say this is the only thing you can study, everybody has to do this, many people are going to misunderstand it. They're going to flip over to nihilists. And, when you're a nihilist, it's a big problem, because then you say, well, cause and effect doesn't exist. And after you die, there's nothing. So have a good time doing whatever you want, and you won't experience any ethical results, results of your ethical conduct. And that's very dangerous. So the Buddha, understanding that, that kind of view would be not very skillful to teach to many people, then he taught the other systems, okay? And so, that's why the mind basis of all. It's, for people, actually, we're going to come to that in a minute. Is it here? Okay. Yeah, I'll explain this in a minute, how the mind basis of all, the foundational consciousness is this. But this is really why, as Buddhists, we try and respect everybody who is, no matter what their philosophy is or theology is, if they're adhering to the basic tenets of their religion, which most religions share, not killing, not stealing, not misusing sexuality, not, lying, these kinds of things. And so to respect people who practice that, and whatever philosophy, theology they have, if it helps them to live an ethical life, that's good. We don't say, oh, what you believe is wrong, because that would just make people confused. It would make them, for some people, if they didn't, for example, believe that there was a creator God, if they didn't believe that, well, the Buddhist view wouldn't make sense to them. And then they would just say, well, forget it, I can do whatever I want. If there's no God, then So I don't have to worry, heaven, hell, forget it. And then that would lead somebody to really create a lot of negativity and non-virtuous karma. So, that's why the Buddha taught all these different, why we have the different tenet systems, and why we have different Buddhist traditions. And you can see in different Buddhist traditions, they will draw out different sutras and say, oh, this, our tradition is based on this sutra. Because for that group of people, the view in that sutra, really speaks to them and it helps them. So it's important. And it also, we shouldn't go to the extreme of saying, well, I just need to learn Madhyamaka because I know that's the highest view. No, we need to learn the other ones because it helps us see our own grasping and what there is to negate in our own wrong views. And also, if we want to benefit other sentient beings, we have to know what their philosophies and theologies are, so that you can deal with the concepts that they have. If you don't know those, you can't speak to them in a way that they can understand, okay? And so to know how to talk to people with different beliefs. I'll give you one example. When we first moved to the Abbey many years ago, the Mennonite church, that's around the corner, they were having an open house. So we went, because we would be good neighbors, and the Mennonites are, very much for nonviolence and simplicity in lifestyle. We have common things. So I was talking to the pastor's wife, and she said, I don't know anything about Buddhism. Do you believe in God? Or what is your idea of God? Something like that. So I didn't go, listen, we have texts that refute the idea of a creator God. It's just a conspiracy theory, forget it. Come to our teachings and we'll teach you the right stuff. That would not be very skillful for helping somebody or for creating world peace. Okay, so I said, well, it depends how you talk about God. If you talk about God as the principle of love and kindness and compassion, yes, in Buddhism, we cherish those values of love and kindness and compassion. We talk about them a lot. We try and meditate and cultivate them. If you talk about, what was my other one? If you talk about beings who are more spiritually advanced than we human beings, yes, we believe in beings like that. We call them Buddhas, we call them Bodhisattvas, but definitely there's people who are, beings who are more spiritually advanced, who can help us and teach us. So we share that idea in common. If you talk about God as a creator, then we Buddhists have a different idea. And I stopped there. Okay? And she was nodded her head, and there was connection there, and we got her stamp of approval. So you can see how His Holiness does that so often in teachings, and that comes from the Buddha doing it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so sometimes we meet born-again people. I'm not talking about born-again Christians. I'm talking about born-again Buddhists. Yeah, who the Lotus Sutra is it. This is the last thing. You have to follow Lotus Sutra. Okay, we meet born-again vegetarians and born-again vegans. Yeah, and you have to eat like this, otherwise it's just you're creating negative karma and you're causing suffering, and this is the only way. So, there's enough born-again things in the world, and that it's always so uncomfortable, isn't it? Because there's no opportunity to say, I see things differently, or I have different needs, or different things make sense to me, different things help me. Yeah, we just get stuck in what I call football team mentality. Except instead of rooting for our football team, we root for our religion. Yeah, or we root for our tradition, Buddhist tradition, or we root for our tenet system, and this is the best one, rah, rah, rah. It's, negates all the other ones. It's the best one. Follow it. Our team is best. The Buddha spoke these words. Let's go for it. Yeah, I don't think that is an attitude that would please the Buddha. We're not rooting for different football teams. And I say this because in Singapore, there's a lot of Christian proselytizing, trying to convert Buddhists, and they've been very successful. Yeah, and they have that view of, our team is best, and everybody's got to be a member of our team, And I said, we're not counting the number of people who are Buddhists. We're not counting the attendance. We don't care how many people are going to church. We're just trying to practice what makes sense to us, and we respect you like that. But don't get so uptight about the Christians, because there's a certain fear in the Buddhist community that the Christians are, this whole tsunami of Christianity is, going to overwhelm. And no, we have our own dignity as Buddhists. We know why we're Buddhists. We don't need to be afraid of them. And we don't need to have dance parties to attract new members, or barbecues, or, all these kinds of things that churches do to get the young people to come. We just kind of leave it, and if people are, we're there, and if people are interested, they come. There's no pressure. Okay? So, so this, I think, is important to have religious harmony. Okay. So we did one sentence. The tenets of the various schools can similarly be viewed as fulfilling these diverse needs. We have just seen how the mind-only school distinguishes definitive teachings from provisional teachings, and in fact, each school has its own criteria for determining whether a teaching of the Buddha is definitive or provisional. So from the Madhyamaka view, the second turning of the Dharma wheel, and the Prajnaparamita Sutras, those are definitive. The third turning with the Samdhinimochana Sutra, is provisional or interpretable. So, there's different criteria. They come to different conclusions. Okay. This is all in, the series with His Holiness. Okay. Okay. In each, so each school has its own criteria for determining whether a teaching of the Buddha is definitive or provisional. In each case, the process is similar. First, one uses analysis to determine the Buddha's ultimate intention in making a particular statement. Second, one determines the Buddha's contextual rationale for making a particular statement. And third, one demonstrates the logical inconsistency, if any, that arises when a particular statement is taken literally. Okay. So the vocabulary for these three criteria is a little bit different, but you'll catch on. Okay, so if we use the example of asserting a foundation consciousness, okay, a mind basis of all, that is the person, that is what carries all the latencies and seeds and things like that. Okay, so what was the Buddha's final intended meaning when he said this? What did the Buddha really mean when he talked about the foundation consciousness? Okay, so saying that it's the basis of all, okay, his intending meaning is the emptiness of inherent existence, which is the basis or the ultimate nature of all phenomena. So when he said basis of all, he wasn't talking about a consciousness. He was talking about emptiness being the basis in which everything exists. It's the ultimate nature of all phenomena. Then the second criteria, what was the Buddha's purpose in giving this teaching on the foundation consciousness? It was to allay the fears of those who confuse emptiness with non-existence by providing a basis of transmission of karmic seeds through the continuum of lives for those who are unable to understand the mere I as the carrier of the karmic seeds and latencies. Okay, so for people who, when you say the I is merely designated, meaning that there's no other existence behind it besides what is designated and imputed on it, for some people this is like way too much, and again they would flip over to nihilism, which would be very harmful. And it, because they say, look, in order for karma to be created in one life and the result experienced in another life, you need something that goes from one life to the next. Okay, we have bookshelves. We just bought 30-something bookshelves from Nevada. Yeah, that it will arise in a couple of days. Get your muscles ready. Okay, and if you want to get those bookshelves from Nevada to the Abbey, you need a vehicle that carries them. They aren't going to fly through space. They don't disappear there and then reappear here like in science fiction. There needs to be something that carries them. So similarly, some people say, look, for the karmic seeds to go from one life to the next, there needs to be a vehicle that holds them, that carries them. You're talking about this I that's merely designated. No such thing exists. That's negating way too much. But there is a foundational consciousness. There is something that is the person, that we can say something of the person goes from this life to the next life. And that's what carries the latencies and seeds. Okay, so for these people, hearing about the foundation consciousness is just so reaffirming. Oh yes, I believe in karma. Yeah, I'm not saying nothing exists. I believe in ethical cause and result, but I need to know how it works. And okay, there's something that goes. The seeds are planted here. This one goes at the time of death into the new body, and that's the, what the person ultimately is. Perfect. Okay. Now, the third thing, what are the logical inconsistencies that follow from taking the teaching on the foundational consciousness literally? Okay, so that's that. Although the Yogacaryans say the foundational consciousness is impermanent, by claiming that it is truly existent, it seems very similar to the Samkhya idea of a permanent primal substance that contains all causes. Okay? So, once you say that the foundational consciousness is truly existent, well, for things to be truly existent, then they would have to be permanent and not be influenced by anything else. And so if you're saying that the foundational consciousness has all the causes of our subject and object, our perceptions and what we perceive, then you sound like a Samkhya, which isn't even a Buddhist school. So that's the logical inconsistencies. Yeah. So this is a very good example when you take any of the beliefs or the tenets of different tenet systems, and then, when it comes to the Madhyamaka refuting them, then you go through this process of, what was the Buddha's actual meaning, his intended meaning on a deeper level. Why did he say this? To who? What was the audience? And 3, what are the logical inconsistencies of accepting that teaching as literal? Okay, so it sets up a good paradigm for us to use when we want to check things out. So the need for such an approach is found in the Buddha's own discourses. There is a verse in which the Buddha urges his followers to take his words as they might accept a metal from a jeweler that appears to be gold. Only after seeing that the metal does not tarnish when burned, can be easily cut, and can be polished to a bright shine, should the metal be accepted as gold. Thus the Buddha gives his permission to critically examine even his own teachings. The Buddha suggests that we make a thorough inquiry into the truth of his words and verify them for ourselves, and only then accept them, but not out of reverence. Okay, so this is important, and again, it's something I've heard His Holiness talk about again and again. And one of the first times he talked about it is, after he started having these meetings with scientists, and the scientists said, well, how do you prove rebirth? Yeah, and His Holiness says, well, usually we're all Buddhists, we grew up believing this. Why do you believe it? Well, the Buddha said so, and you point to a scripture here. The Buddha talked about different life forms, and he talked about rebirth. So the Buddha said that, we accept it. Well, you can't say to somebody who doesn't have faith in the Buddha said this, therefore it's true. Yeah. And even His Holiness began to question some of the things, and this was like revolutionary in the Tibetan community. When His Holiness, after, studying a little bit of science, came and said, Vasubandhu's explanation is not quite accurate. It doesn't jive with what scientists can prove. And then he set out this whole explanation about why the world is round, and how it can be daytime on one part of the planet and nighttime on the other. And he gave proof when he was, traveling in America. He called somebody in India. It was daytime in America, night in India. The next time he called them, night in India was daytime. No, night in America was daytime in India. Look, this is real. You can prove it for yourself. Well, this sent ripples through the Tibetan Geshis. It's like, how can you say that Vasubandhu made a boo-boo? Because Vasubandhu wrote all the, Abhidharma texts that explain the whole structure of the universe, and how far the moon is from the earth, and how far the sun is from the earth, and that the earth is flat, and those two orbited around it. And he said, look, science has proved, that the numbers Vasubandhu said are incorrect, and the world isn't flat. And, we have to accept what is true. We don't just say, because Buddha said so. So he said, similarly, when it comes to rebirth on the debating ground, if somebody challenges, how do you say rebirth? Usually, in a Buddhist monastery, then they start quoting scripture. And His Holiness said, you can't do that. We have to have a logical reason that can prove the existence of rebirth. Yeah? And we have to be able to explain that logically. Yeah? And give examples of people who have remembered their previous lives. Okay? And so that was like revolutionary. Okay? And I remember, because, I was studying with Geshe Jumpa Tekcho, who's a Geshe Larampa. He was a former abbot of Sarajay Monastery, very well respected, very erudite. But, when this topic came up in class, he insisted the world was flat. Vasubandhu was, and so one of the nuns did the math, because the Tibetans measure things in yojanas. It's some ancient Indian measurement. And there's a debate of how big a yojana is. But anyway, she took one of the measurements, she calculated it, and she said, okay, if you say, what Geshe said, that Bodhgaya is the center, of our world system, and you go down that number of yojanas, you come out, and Vasubandhu said that number of yojanas deep under the earth, that's where the hell realm is. She said, you come out in America. Yeah, and of course we all laughed, but Geshe was like, wait a minute, and it really took some discussion and time, So it shows you that what we learn when we're little sticks in us, and it, when we learn something that doesn't agree, and we realize that the new view makes better sense than what we grew up with, it takes time to overcome, our grasping at what is something learned in this life. Yeah. Okay. But this is His Holiness's, and I think this is why he appeals so much internationally to people. Yeah, is that he can talk the language of other viewpoints, other cultures, and so on. Okay. Thus, the Buddha gives his permission to critically examine even his own teachings. And we have to do that, because if we don't really think about things and prove it to ourselves by using the logic that we're studying, then we're not really going to believe it. And when it comes to something like emptiness, if we don't really accept the philosophy, then we're never going to generate even a conceptual consciousness that realizes emptiness. And without that, we can't generate a direct perceiver of emptiness. Okay, so really understanding the teachings is critical. Yeah, and when Tsongkhapa talks about the three principal aspects of the path, the first one is renunciation, and that we have to think about death and impermanence. We have to think about the disadvantages of samsara, and many people don't like thinking about that. Yeah, it's like, I don't like thinking about death. It reminds me that I'm going to die, and that scares me. And the defects of samsara, it says there's no happiness in samsara, but I want happiness in samsara. I don't know what nirvana is. It's too abstract. I just want some relief from my suffering right now. And why can't we have a perfect world? It's like if we all just became Buddhists, then we would all have a perfect world. Yeah, fat chance. and people don't like to even think about it. But if we don't do these meditations and convince our own mind that, there's no ultimate lasting happiness in samsara, although there may be a little bit of pleasure here and there, but, it isn't lasting ultimate happiness. Unless we really feel that and believe that, then we're not going to even try and get ourselves out of samsara, let alone all sentient beings. Yeah? So we have to ask ourselves, if you're having some resistance, I don't want to think about, oh, there's the suffering of pain, there's the dukkha of change, meaning that even when I have happiness, it turns into suffering. Then there's the dukkha of all pervasive conditioning, which means that everything is in the nature of dukkha. This is just too much for me. Okay, then yeah, become a Christian, become a Jew, become a Muslim, But really, if we want to get out of samsara, then we have to do these meditations and really familiarize our mind with it again and again. And question it. Yeah, like, wow, I had a nice lunch and I felt pleasure, I felt happiness. And our question is, what's wrong with that? Well, that's not the issue. There's nothing wrong with having a good lunch. There's nothing wrong with feeling pleasure, okay? The problem is, when we get attached to that good lunch, and then when we, boss other people around or take more than to get it, or take more than our fair share, or complain when it isn't what we like, or, we see our version of great lunch as ultimate happiness, but it actually, that thinking like that creates problems in my life, okay? So then you start to really investigate and prove these things to yourself. And every once in a while, when you're meditating, I don't know if it ever happens to you, but something clicks and you really go, my mind is so out of tune with reality, it's pathetic. Yeah? What my mind thinks exists, or the way it exists, I grasp onto permanence. I think that because people are here in front of me today, they're going to be here in front of me tomorrow. Everybody's going to be alive tomorrow. Nothing's going to change. That we're all going to be the same people, and I know these people. I know what to expect from them. It's entirely predictable. And we develop that kind of nonsensical, ridiculous view in our own head. And occasionally, in our meditation, we go, wow, what I'm thinking has no basis in conventional reality. We're not even talking about ultimate reality, conventional reality, that I think everybody is going to be here tomorrow and nothing's going to change. What a ridiculous thing to think. Why do I think that? Why do I say with my mouth, everything's momentarily impermanent? But in here, I think it's all the same. Why do I say that, that things are not stable, that the future isn't predictable? But why in here do I think it is? Something's wrong with my thinking. And when those things happen, that's when you really gain faith in the Buddha, because you realize, he really knew what he was talking about. It's like reading Shantideva. He zeroes in on, exactly what your misconception is. Okay. So taking direction from statements such as these, ancient Indian monastic universities such as Nalanda developed a tradition whereby students would critically subject the scholastic work of their own teachers to analysis. Such critical analysis was seen in no way to go against the great admiration and reverence the students had for their teachers. Now, this is always very interesting, because His Holiness talks about that and, is telling everybody, look, you can question even what your teachers say. But what you find in reality is when different, in the different monasteries, the different yiksha, the different texts that they follow, if their yiksha writer has a different view than the other ones, they stick up for that one. Yeah. And, they will, and even if what their yiksha writer said, you can prove is not, if you take it literally, it doesn't make sense, they will make it so it now makes sense. Yeah, because how dare you say that, this lineage Lama had an idea that isn't logically verifiable. You can't say that. Okay, so it's very interesting when you get into it to see the difference between what His Holiness is encouraging and the pressure to show respect to the lineage. And I mean, there is reason to show respect to the lineage. What these guys knew was amazing, and to respect them. But His Holiness says, yes, you can respect, and at the same time point out when something does not make sense. But it was interesting when I was working with one of the Geshis on the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. Sometimes we would come to some argument, and I would say, Geshe-la, this doesn't make any sense. And he said, no, you can't say it doesn't make any sense. You have to say, I don't understand it. Okay, so yes, in many cases, really that's what I needed to say. I don't understand it. It's much, when we approach things with humility, we're more open to understanding them. Yeah, but if we approach it with humility, we learn, and we still don't think it makes sense, then His Holiness is saying, yeah, you can debate that. Yeah. But this Geshe wouldn't let me do that. But it was something good for me to learn. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're talking about Nalanda. So such critical analysis was seen in no way to go against the great admiration and reverence the students had for their teachers. The famous Indian master Vasubandhu, for example, had a disciple known as Vimuktisena, who was said to surpass Vasubandhu in his understanding of the perfection of wisdom texts. He questioned Vasubandhu's interpretation and instead developed his own interpretation of the text in accordance with the Madhyamaka school. Okay, Vasubandhu wasn't a Madhyamaka. What he was is very confusing because the Abhidharma Kosha was written from the Vaibhashika viewpoint. He wrote a commentary from the Sautantrika viewpoint, and people say that later he became a Chittamadra. Okay, so so his student, was a Madhyamaka, and it said also, Lama Atisha, when he went to Indonesia and studied with Sir Lingpa, who he had such incredible respect for, because Sir Lingpa was the one that gave him all the bodhicitta teachings, all the mind training teachings that started that whole Kadampa lineage. And Sir Lingpa was a Chittamatra, and Atisha was a Madhyamaka. And yeah, I mean, Atisha had incredible reverence for his teacher, yeah, but they had different views. That was okay, yeah. But let me tell you, if you don't vote for the person I voted for, no, I'm joking, yeah. Maybe. No, I am joking. Okay. An example of this to the Tibetan tradition, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, is Lalak Jamchu Tsang, who was one of the disciples of the great 19th century master Ju Mipam. And Mipam was from the Nyingma school. Although Alak Damcha Tsang had tremendous admiration and reverence from his teacher, he voiced objections to some of Ju Mipam's writings. Once a student of Alak Damcha Tsang is said to have asked whether it was appropriate to critically object to the writings of one's own teacher. Alak Damcha Tsang immediately response was, if one's great teacher says things that are not correct, one must take even one's Lama to task. Okay? And and this is good advice, And so sometimes, when I'm speaking, I say the wrong word. It's good when you correct me. One time in the previous Serkan Rinpoche was teaching at Nalanda in France, and we were there, and he said something, and then one day, and then the next day he said something else, and somebody said, oh, but Rinpoche, the previous day you said this, and today you said this. We're confused. And Rinpoche said, I said that on the previous day. You guys know that isn't correct. Why didn't you stop and tell me and have me correct it right then? Yeah, and he scolded us for not saying something. So, okay, there's a Tibetan saying, retain your reverence and admiration for the person, but subject the writing to a thorough critical analysis. So this, is very good advice. It's contrary to our Western tendency of somebody is either entirely good or entirely bad. This is saying you can have reverence and respect for certain qualities of a person, but another quality, maybe there is, in this case, an explanation that can be refuted by logic, So refuting that doesn't mean you have to lose all respect for the person, and and having respect for that person, for your teacher, doesn't mean you have to believe everything they say. Okay? So this is important, I think, because we really like to make everything all good and all bad. And especially, this is one of the problems when it comes to teaching that the guru is the Buddha, okay, to people who are very beginners, because it doesn't help people. They misunderstand it, and then they think the guru is the Buddha, so I want to drive from here to Spokane. I should be able to go and ask my teacher the directions to get there. Yeah, well, your teacher, lives in India, comes from Tibet, doesn't speak English, has only made that ride one time. Why are you expecting them to give you directions to get to Spokane? Well, they're a Buddha, they should be omniscient. And then, that means they're not omniscient. Oh, therefore, okay, I don't have any respect for them at all. No respect, just I want a teacher that's omniscient. And so people get very, very confused, or they say, well, he actually knows how to get to Spokane, but he wants you to learn how to look it up on the internet or how to listen to series instructions. So he pretends to not know. Okay, you're wound up with explaining things like that, okay? So, because people are afraid, well, if you lose that, then you won't have any respect for your teacher at all. And that's ridiculous. Yeah, they don't know the way to get to Spokane. Huh? Yeah? So you're not going to respect anybody who doesn't know how to get to Spokane? Then many of us won't even respect ourselves. Yeah? So, yeah. We have to have a broad mind, okay? So, the Tibetan saying says, retain your reverence and admiration for the person, but subject the writing to a thorough critical analysis. This demonstrates a healthy attitude and illustrates the Buddhist tradition known as the approach of the four reliances. Okay, so you've probably heard these before, but we'll go through them. First, do not rely on the person, but on the words. Okay, so you don't just say, oh, this person knows everything, so everything they say is right and good, and I don't even need to listen to what they say or think about their words, because the person is the ultimate thing that I listen to. And Buddha's saying, no. Okay? The understanding the words are more than just having faith in the person. Okay? Then do not rely merely on the words, but on their meaning. Why? Because we can repeat words and think we understand them, but without understanding the meaning. So don't rely just on being able to repeat the words. Think about them, understand the meaning. Okay? Then the third, do not rely merely on the provisional meaning, but on the definitive meaning. Okay? Why? Because the provisional meaning is talking about things in our conventional world, and ignorance of that, of, all the different details of conventionalities, that is not the root of our samsara. The root of our samsara is our ignorance of the ultimate nature, how things actually exist. Okay? So when we rely on words, we shouldn't just rely on the conventional meaning, but actually look at what is the deeper meaning. In other words, how do things really exist? Okay? And then, fourth, do not rely merely on the intellectual meaning, but on direct experience. So, yes, we need the intellectual meaning. Yes, we need to have a valid, conceptual understanding gained by applying reasoning. Yeah, we need that, but that alone is not sufficient to eradicate all of the ignorance and other defilements on our mind stream. We need the direct experience of emptiness. Okay, so this is teaching us how to look at that. So quite good advice. Okay, now the Madhyamaka, middle way interpretation. By the way, middle way, I used to think, they say it's the middle way view. So middle way means, and it's the middle way between two extremes. So yeah, you have inherent existence, you have non-existence, you add them together, cut them in half, and that's the middle way view. And I thought that's what it meant. No, the middle way view is entirely separate from both extremes. Yeah, it's very, very different than both extremes. Okay, so in contrast to the mind-only school, the middle way school takes the perfection of wisdom texts to be definitive, accepting the statement that all things and events, in other words, all phenomena, are devoid of any inherent existence, as literal. Oh, if that's literal, okay. But in the Heart Sutra that we just chanted, it says no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. Make up your mind, that sounds pretty literal, that those things don't exist. Yeah? That's what Avalokitesvara said when the Buddha was blessing his mind stream to do this. So what's the story? How can you say the Heart Sutra is a definitive sutra if what it's saying is completely wrong? It must be provisional. No, they still say it's literal. Why? Because earlier in the sutra, it talks about there's no things being inherent existence. Okay? So what is said earlier in the sutra, you can apply later, because saying it every single time, there's no inherently existent eye, there's no inherently existent ear, there's no inherently existent nose, there's no inherently, with the sutra would get really, really long. And so it's kind of, just saying there's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. We have to understand, based on what the Buddha said earlier in the sutra, that he's taking that qualification and putting it here. Okay? So the Madhyamikas say that the sutra is literal. That sutra. Okay, the Madhyamika view does not differentiate between the existential status of subject and object, between mind and the world, okay, like the mind-only school does. The 100,000 verses on the perfection of wisdom explicitly presents this view with the statement that on the ultimate level, all phenomena do not exist. In other words, it doesn't just say all phenomena do not exist. It's preceded by on the ultimate level, all phenomena do not exist. Meaning that if you are looking for some ultimate nature that is the object, you can't find it. Okay? So for the middle way, the perfection of wisdom scriptures remain literal, and the emptiness of all phenomena becomes definitive. Okay? This distinction between the tenets of the mind-only school and the middle way school may not immediately seem important, but if we examine it closely, we can appreciate its significance. The mind-only school acknowledges the emptiness of phenomena in the external world, and what it's empty of, is not inherent existence. It's empty of being existing separate from the latency of the mind that also produced the consciousness apprehending it. Okay? So the mind-only school acknowledges the emptiness of phenomena in the external world, and because of this, its adherents may be able to cut through attachment and aversion to external phenomena by recognizing the emptiness of this phenomena. And that's what I was talking about yesterday, applying what we learned here, so that when you are looking at things, it's like, oh, this is related to my mind, to what I am calling it. And my opinions of people, these are my opinions that I'm projecting. They aren't coming from the side of that person, okay? They're coming from, the person's appearing to me that way because of the latencies on my mind, so I'm perceiving them that way, okay? So that is quite helpful for lessening our attachment and our anger and jealousy and so on. Okay, so that view is very helpful to people. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mind-only school acknowledges the emptiness of phenomena in the external world, and because of this, its adherents may be able to cut through attachment and aversion to external phenomena by recognizing the emptiness of these phenomena. But this is not enough, say the Madhyamikas, unless one is able to recognize the emptiness of the internal world, our four mental aggregates as well. We may become attached to such experiences as bliss or tranquility, and adverse to such experiences such as sadness and fear. Okay, so if we're only saying external things are empty and still grasping how our perceptions, our interpretations, and these things as real, then then when you experience the bliss of concentration, this is real bliss. You haven't learned, you haven't thought about the definitive scripture, the ultimate way of existing. So this is blissful, this must be nirvana. And then, you misconceive an upper rebirth in a God realm for nirvana, and when the karma for that ends, kerplunk, you go down. So, Okay, so its adherents may be able to cut through attachment and aversion to external phenomena by recognizing the emptiness of these phenomena, but this is not enough. Unless one is able to recognize the emptiness of the internal world as well, we may become attached to such experiences as bliss or tranquility, and adverse to experiences such as sadness or fear. So we may not even want to meditate on bodhicitta, because bodhicitta involves seeing the dukkha of other sentient beings. That makes us sad. I don't want to think about that, because then our sadness, we aren't negating the inherent existence of the sadness. It's, I feel sad. It's like when you're in a bad mood, when you're depressed. How do you feel? Do you question that mood? Do you say, oh, this mood is just a projection of my mind? No, I feel depressed. Everything is without hope. I can't do anything right. Other people aren't cooperative. Everything's falling apart. Or somebody died. I feel so sad. How can I live without this person? And we accept, all of our feelings, all of our emotions, all of our views as real. We don't even analyze them to see that they too lack inherent existence. Okay? So we're still very stuck in samsara. Okay. So not understanding the emptiness of all phenomena, not differentiating between internal and external, mind and the world, is the refinement made by the Middle Way School. Understanding this thoroughly for ourselves enables us to break completely free of the bondage of the afflictions of all circumstances. So that's why Madhyamaka is important. Some middle way proponents, followers of a school known as the Yogacara or Vijnanavada school, maintain that the mind-only distinction between internal and external worlds, but apply the teachings on emptiness equally to both. On the whole, however, the Middle Way School teaches that when it comes to the ultimate nature of reality, it is just not helpful to differentiate between internal and external worlds. Okay. Further, the Madhyamikas argue that one of the premises for the mind-only rejection of the reality of the external world is their belief that such reality presupposes the existence of the indivisible atoms or particles. So this is one of the reasons why Chittamadra's put forth that things are empty of being external objects. Because to be external objects, they would have to be made of these indivisible atoms or indivisible particles. And we talked about this yesterday, how it's impossible to, if things were made of such a thing, that they form larger objects, because they would, if they had no parts, then there couldn't be parts that join together, and they would just merge completely. So the Chittamatra negate that kind of thing, and that's one of the bases, actually, for their adopting the view that there are no external objects. Such particles, if they existed, would be the ultimate constitutive matter of the universe and would act as a basis for the existence of the objective world. Since the notion of an indivisible absolute particle is untenable for Madhyamikas, they argue that one must reject the objective reality of the material world, and it's untenable for the Chittamatras too. Okay, so the Madhyamikas respond to this by pointing out that one can use the same argument to reject the substantive reality of the internal world. So they're saying, okay, Chittamatra, you say there's no partless particles. We agree with you for that. You say, therefore, there's no external world. Yes, we agree that there's no solid things that exist by their own side externally. But, what about our internal world? They, the same philosophy that says form is composed of these partless particles of material, they also say that internal things are composed of partless particles, partless moments of time of those different things. Okay? So you should, Madhyamikas are saying, you need to look to the internal world too and negate that being substantially existent. Okay? Okay. For in order to accept the substantive reality of consciousness or mind, which the Chittamatras do, one must presuppose the existence of indivisible moments of cognition, which are also ultimate constituents of reality. I don't know that Chittamatras necessarily accept that. I haven't heard them refute it. But, if you believe that the mind is truly existent, yes, then you have to point to something. Well, it's these, moments of consciousness, and that's what the mind is. And the Madhyamikas say, but, if those are discrete moments of consciousness, then they're like partless particles. They don't have a beginning, middle, and end. But anyway, you can divide a moment of consciousness, it has to have a beginning, middle, and end. So that means it has parts. Okay? And this goes into the beautiful refutation of the present moment, which I really love, because people saying we've got to live in the present moment makes me nuts, because there is no inherently existent present moment to live in. You can't identify what it is because you can't pinpoint it, and say that's it. It doesn't exist. There's a continuum, yes. Can you point out discrete things? Moments of consciousness or discrete moments of time that are just like lined up and glued together? No, you can't. Okay, it's kind of like, I don't know if you remember high school math, but my math teacher really got us quite excited, and he would talk about all these, what do you call them? puzzle kind of things, you know. And one of them was, if I want to go between here and here, I should be able to go halfway. And then I should be able to go, then I go halfway from there. Then I go halfway again, and I go halfway. And there's an infinite number of halfways. So when can I ever touch this if I'm always going halfway? Okay, I love those things, you know, because they're showing that just how we make these conceptions that then imprison us, you know, and yeah, just somehow, yeah, you get there. It's magic. You just keep going halfway and you eventually get there. Don't ask me to explain it logically. Okay. Okay, for in order to accept the substantive reality of consciousness or mind, one must presuppose the existence of indivisible moments of cognition, which are also ultimate constituents of reality. That's what the Sao Tantrikas say are ultimate truths. Okay? This, they say, the Madhyamikas say, is untenable, for one can conceive of consciousness only on the basis of a continuous, dependently arising stream of cognition, not as discrete moments of consciousness. Thus, even the internal world of consciousness and cognition is devoid of substantive or inherent reality. By applying this reasoning non-discriminately to both the external world of matter and the internal world of consciousness, the adherents of the Middle Way school argue that one can undermine the basis for attachment to both the external and internal worlds. And that's really what we have to do. As long as we're grasping onto our internal world and not questioning it at all, yeah, then we're really stuck. Yeah. And you can see, you know, science has, you know, is doing so many good, but it's entirely focused on the external world. Yeah, and so it's missing that whole idea of examining experience. Okay, so we will stop here with the two Middle Way schools. Let me mark it. Any questions? Or you want to think about it and ask them next time? Or you're hungry? Yeah.
Storehouse of consciousness the same as the foundational consciousness? They're interchangeable? Okay.
Yeah, just different terminology, storehouse consciousness. Anything else? Everything perfectly clear, huh? Yeah.
I'm not quite understanding how, if the objects are just arising from the same latency as my mind, then who are the sentient beings we're trying to liberate?
Oh yes, this question always comes up. Yeah. Oh, so the sentient beings, you know, you're just a product of my mind? The way I am perceiving you is a product of the mind, of my mind. The way she's perceiving you is a product of her mind, and so forth. Yeah. And the way you're perceiving yourself is a product, you know, depending on your latencies. Yeah. So then, you know, so okay, that sounds nice in accordance with Chitta Madhya. But doesn't there have to be something that is it that we can, yes, we all have our own interpretations, but there has to be something that is it, you know. So when we look at Lam Sel, there has to be a person that is Lamsel, even though we all have our own opinions of her. Yeah. And this is kind of saying, who says there has to be a solid, concrete Lamsel? Yeah? Who says that there's something separate from, the convergence of the things that we all agree upon? Like we all agree, okay, she's a nun, yeah? But does that mean she's inherently a nun, that that's who she is? No, we all have the latencies in our mind to see her as such. Yeah, Mudita doesn't see her as a nun. Yeah, Mudita says, oh, this is somebody who's going to pet me. Yeah, and Upekkha and Karuna and Maitri all agree with Mudita. Yeah, so they say, look, we all agree, we're perceiving her the way she is. And Chittamatra say, no, that's just, the convergence of your different ripenings of different latencies. Yeah. Yeah. Just something in your mind say, no, it can't be that way. There has to be something that really is the person. Yeah. It's interesting when you hear these things. Watch sometimes how your mind goes, yeah, that sounds good, but it really can't be that way. Then all she is a bunch of opinions. No, I don't think we can say that's all she is. Yeah, but when you come to conventional objects, conventional truths, yeah, those are things that appear true to an ignorant mind. Ignorance doesn't establish those things as existing the way it appears to ignorance. But those are the things, that appear that way. But when you examine and you try and find a core, yeah, what are you going to find? Yeah, you're going to find a true Lamsel somewhere. Where is it? Yeah, that little, what did they say before there used to be like a little, what do we call it? Homunculus? Something, some little guy in our pituitary gland that, is us. Yeah. It's a good, guess for people who don't know. But, you can't say this is who the person is. Okay, we'll stop here.